Namo Buddhaya and welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV Sunday program. I am Lisa Chu. Today we will start with a Dharma talk followed by a song and a Dhammapada session. The Dharma talk today is by Venerable Dr. Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is an American Theravada Buddhist monk ordained in Sri Lanka. The Venerable teaches in New York and New Jersey area and has authored several publications grounded in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. We are grateful to the Venerable for sharing with us the Dharma topic titled Living the Best Life, the Buddha Answer to Life's Urgent Questions.
Okay, so I'm delighted to be able to speak to the members of the Theosophical Society of the United States today. The subject of the talk that I'll be giving today will be based on a discourse of the Buddha. The discourse occurs in two places within the Buddhist canon, the canonical texts, and it's set against the background of ancient Indian culture in which there are many types of living beings quite different from those that we're acquainted with. And one of the types of these beings in the Buddhist picture of the universe, type of being that figures in this discourse, is called in Pali, the ancient Indian language of the Buddhist text, is called a yaka. And in Sanskrit, these beings are known as yakshas. The yakshas are fierce, demonic beings, very destructive, very powerful, but they also have within them the seed of wisdom and goodness. So this discourse is going to feature a dialogue between the Buddha and a yaksha by the name of Alavaka. And as the discourse proceeds, the Buddha is going to gradually tame and discipline Alavaka and transform him from a violent, destructive, demonic type of being into a peaceful, beautiful, radiant being who works in the world to promote the Buddha's teachings. If one likes, you could take the discourse literally, or one could also take it a little bit symbolically. So we don't have to take the yakshas as being an actual class of living beings, but we could take the yakshas as being demonic and destructive people who are tamed, disciplined, and made gentle through the peaceful influence of the Dharma, the Buddha's teaching. When the sutta begins, the Buddha has taken shelter in a cave that belongs to this demon Alavaka. Alavaka is gone at the time. And so the Buddha has been spending the night in this cave. And in the wee hours of the night, Alavaka returns to the cave and becomes angry, explodes with anger to see that this wandering ascetic has taken refuge in his cave. So he comes to the Buddha and tells the Buddha, "Get out of here, O monk." And then the Buddha complies politely and says, "If that's what you wish, I will go." But then Alavaka has a second thought. Maybe I could give shelter to this monk. So he says, "No, come back." The Buddha comes back. When he re-enters, Alavaka again becomes angry and says, "Get out." When the Buddha leaves, Alavaka says again, "Come back." This goes on 3 times. And then the third time, Alavaka says to the Buddha, "Get out of my cave." And this time the Buddha says, "I won't get out. I'm going to stay here." Then Alavaka says to the Buddha, "I'm going to ask you some questions to present you with some riddles. If you answer me, you can stay in the cave. But if you can't answer me, what I'm going to do, I'm going to split your heart, drive you insane, and then take you by the feet and fling you across the Ganges River. The Buddha replies to Alavaka and says, you can say what you want, Alavaka, but I don't see anyone in this world who has the power to split my heart, to drive me insane, or to take me by the feet and throw me across the Ganges River. So then Alavaka says, now I'm going to ask the questions. And the Buddha says, go ahead and ask. And we have here two sets of questions, and it's expressed in verse. Each set of questions leads into a particular goal of the Buddha's teachings. So the Buddha's teachings, you could say, have two goals. One, we could say, is a provisional or temporary goal, which is to lead a happy, peaceful, beneficial life in this world, and by accumulating good karma, wholesome volitional activities, by accumulating this good karma to achieve a happy rebirth in one's next life. That is, to achieve rebirth either as a human being under favorable conditions, fortunate conditions, or to take rebirth in one of the many heavenly realms posited by Buddhist cosmology. But for Buddhism, that even the idea of a heavenly rebirth is just a temporary stopping place, not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal, as we're going to see, is to break free from the entire cycle of repeated birth and death by attaining enlightenment and realizing nirvana, or in Pali we say nibbana, the state which is free from repeated birth, aging, and death. And so we're going to take these two sets of questions and the Buddha's response to them in turn. So the first set of questions that Alavaka asks, he says, what here is a person's best treasure? What, well practiced, brings happiness? What is truly the sweetest of tastes? And what is the best way to live one's life? So these are the questions that I would say are directed towards a person who is seeking to lead a good, wholesome life in this world, a life that will be beneficial to themselves, beneficial to others, and a life that will create the kind of, in Pali we say kusala kamma, the wholesome, beautiful, auspicious karma with the capacity to bring a favorable rebirth in one's next existence. So the Buddha starts his answer, and I'll take each line of the answer. So the question, what here is a person's best treasure? And the Buddha replies that faith is here a person's best treasure. And the Pali word that the Buddha uses in this line of verse, the Pali word is saddha. And different translators use different renderings for the word saddha. Some use confidence, which to me sounds weak. I prefer to use faith, even though some translators are a little hesitant about the word faith, because for some readers and listeners, it brings up connotations coming from their own background, perhaps a Christian background, where people are expected to have unquestioning faith. Whereas in Buddhism, we emphasize grounding faith on investigation, examination, and reasoning. And so I like to use, for the Pali word saddha, I like to use the word faith, because for me, that word has a stronger emotional resonance. But we have to remember that faith in Buddhism is never just blind submission to authority, but is based on some degree of understanding, personal insight, investigation. And the way I understand the use of the word faith here, this is not referring to the specific faith or faith that's specific to the Buddha's teaching, but this would be the kind of quality of faith that I would say is common to a variety, to the great variety of religious and spiritual teachings, which is the way I would characterize this faith, is that there is behind the play of visible events, there is some kind of invisible, indiscernible principle which ensures that good and bad deeds bring about the consequences that correspond to the ethical nature of those deeds. So I would say that this is perhaps we could call this faith, that we are living in a morally organized universe, a morally significant universe. And this is a kind of rejoinder, a reply to the dominant materialism that's propagated sometimes in the name of science, though it's really a kind of almost a dogmatic scientism, which says that the fundamental reality is just the play of material particles through space and time. And out of this play of matter, mind and consciousness has arisen as just a byproduct, and that our moral values, our ethical values have no ultimate significance, but they are just almost random ideas that we devise ourselves, perhaps just for the purpose of preserving the order of society. But Buddhism, along with probably all the world religions, say that that is not the case, that moral values, ethical values are built into the very structure of the universe. And the universe is so configured that our good and bad deeds have the capacity, the potential to bring about results for ourselves that correspond to the ethical nature of those deeds. The way this is formulated in Buddhism is to say that bad deeds, unwholesome deeds, bring as their consequences for the agent, the one who performs those deeds bring about suffering and misery for the person himself, herself, as well as for those affected by that person's actions. But even more, that these bad deeds don't only lead to misery and suffering here and now, but that they also bring bad consequences for our future destiny. And in Buddhism, this is expressed by saying that bad deeds have the capacity, the potential to bring about a state of rebirth, a new existence under conditions of suffering. So the Buddhist texts speak about different subhuman realms into which rebirth can take place, including the animal realm or even infernal realms. Though existence for Buddhism in any realm is impermanent, so there's no everlasting hell. But if the negative deeds are strong enough, powerful enough, they could bring a rebirth into one of the infernal realms, which might last hundreds or thousands of years, though eventually the karma wears off and the person takes rebirth elsewhere. then conversely, good deeds, or we call these wholesome deeds, create this beautiful karma, this auspicious karma, which brings happiness and well-being in this life and will generate in the future a rebirth in one of the good destinations. That would be rebirth back into the human realm under auspicious conditions, fortunate conditions, or rebirth into one of the multiple celestial or heavenly realms. And so when we have this faith, this confidence, this trust in the working of this law of karma, in the moral structure of the universe, this will give us the incentive, the motivation for avoiding unwholesome karma and for engaging in good deeds, in wholesome karma. So in a sense, we could say that this faith, though it involves a certain degree of trust, a certain degree of belief, but it serves as a basis for making wise decisions in the types of activities we engage in the way we organize our lives, in the types of relationships that we establish. And so faith, we could say, in fact, the Buddha says, is the best treasure because it's when we have this faith that we are motivated, strongly motivated to avoid the unwholesome and to cultivate the wholesome. Of course, if we lack this faith, it's still possible that people will have a naturally, deeply ingrained moral consciousness, which will motivate them to behave in ethically laudable ways and ethically excellent ways. But too often what happens is that when people develop a skepticism about the value of moral actions, when they become skeptical that our actions have any long-range consequences, then they just become too prone to surrender to the mind's deeply instinctive tendencies to throw all moral restraint to the winds and to just act according to their impulse. And this is what we see too, very sadly, in today's world, where people don't have the kind of restraint, the kind of conscientious guidance of moral values. And so they just act under the impulses of greed, pursuing their own wealth and power at the expense of others, engaging in violence, supporting even violent causes. And we see this at the international level, where countries are trying to pillage the wealth of other countries, exploit people to increase the wealth of the powerful people in the control of those countries. And so even if we see this, even at the social, at the economic level, in this country, the United States, we have this vast disparity of wealth between the small clique of extremely wealthy people and more people just struggling to get by from day to day, because those in positions of power and wealth don't have a sense of conscientious concern for the less fortunate, and so they just hoard more and more wealth for themselves. I just heard last week that during the course of this coronavirus pandemic, 650 billionaires in this country have increased their wealth by $1 trillion, while so many millions of people are struggling just to get by from day to day. Something like 30 million more people during this period have plunged from the lower middle class into poverty. And many people are having trouble just to get enough food to subsist from day to day, or to get the medical assistance that they need. So I would say that this is due to a lack of faith, of true faith in the value of moral principles and ethical conduct on the part of our leaders, the political and economic leaders. Whereas if we have a country which is grounded in faith, faith in moral values and moral conduct, then that would tend to promote much greater economic equity, and people will go out of their way to help others rather than exploit them for their own benefit. So we could see at many levels and many dimensions that faith is the best treasure for the individual person, and also, I would say, for a community and society. Okay, now we'll come to the second question of the demon Alavaka. He asks, what well practiced brings happiness? And then the Buddha says, the Dharma well practiced brings happiness. And the word Dhamma is a very, very broad term used throughout the Buddha's texts with many different meanings. So sometimes the word Dhamma, or Sanskrit dharma, is used to mean the Buddha's teaching itself in its entirety. Sometimes it's used to mean a specific doctrine or principle. And sometimes it's used to mean the law of goodness, the law of righteousness and truth operating behind the scenes of the cosmic process. But the commentary here to the sutta gives a more specific definition of the word Dhamma here. It says that the Dhamma here can be understood as the 10 courses, the 10 ways of wholesome action. So what are these 10 ways of wholesome action? These are a kind of guide to right conduct found throughout the Buddha's discourses. And we have to also notice that the Buddha often organizes things into numerical lists. And this was done because the Buddha's teaching, when it was first given, was not written down, but it was preserved orally from generation to generation. So the teachers would learn the teachings, they would pass them on orally to their students, who would then memorize them and bear them in mind, and then pass them on to their students. And this went on for about 300 or 400 years. So to make the teaching easy to remember, easy to transmit, the Buddha used many numerical lists. And so here we have a particular code called the 10 ways of wholesome conduct, the 10 pathways of wholesome action. And of these 10 pathways, 3 pertain to bodily action, which means avoiding killing or physically harming others, but to behave with kindness and compassion towards others. To abstain from stealing, but to be honest in one's dealings with others. To abstain from sexual misconduct, but to remain faithful to one's partners and not to encroach upon or to disrupt the relationships of others. So those are 3 ways that pertain to bodily action. Then we have 4 ways that relate to speech, to verbal action. To abstain from lying, but to speak the truth. To abstain from malicious speech, that is slander, dividing, breaking up friendships through spreading harmful tales, but instead to speak in ways that promote harmony and unity between people. Third, to abstain from harsh, angry speech, but to speak gently and politely to others. And fourth, to abstain from gossip and idle chatter, but to speak meaningfully about substantial matters. So those are 4 ways of wholesome action that pertain to speech. And then we have 3 that relate to one's state of mind. To avoid excessive greed, possessiveness, trying to obtain the possessions of others, but instead to practice generosity. To abstain from ill will and anger, but instead to develop goodwill, a mind of kindness and compassion towards others. And then third, to avoid wrong view, particularly views that undermine the basis of morality, but instead to hold right view, views that maintain the basis, the philosophical basis for ethical conduct. So those are 10 ways of wholesome conduct. And we could see that if a person violates those 10 ways, then even if they are living in what seems to be luxury and have a lot of possessions and power, but inwardly there'll be the voice of conscience constantly reminding them that you are creating suffering for others and you're sort of throwing away the precious opportunity of your human existence. And then because of their actions, they will be generating that unwholesome karma, which even if they don't believe in the law of karma, even if they don't see the impact of their deeds, but those actions that break the tenets of morality, that violate the basic standards of ethical conduct, will be depositing seeds within the stream of their mind, invisible seeds that have the capacity at the time of death to bring a new existence, a rebirth. And the unwholesome seeds, the seeds of the unwholesome karma, bring rebirth into the planes of misery, the realms of suffering. Whereas wholesome karma, wholesome actions, actions that conform to those 10 ways of wholesome conduct, those activities deposit beautiful and wholesome seeds, which are like the seeds of beautiful flowers. So at the time of death, those seeds become activated and they can bring a rebirth into happy realms of existence, just like the seeds of the beautiful flowers ripen and bring the beautiful flowers. And so that's why Dhamma well practiced, that is, actions that conform to the 10 ways of wholesome conduct, bring happiness and harmony and well-being in this life itself. And at the time and during the course of our life, they deposit these beautiful seeds within the stream of the mind. And then when death comes, it'll blossom in the form of a good rebirth, a desirable rebirth in happy realms of existence. So in this way, we say, Dhamma well practiced brings happiness. Okay, then Alavika's third question, the demon's third question, what is the sweetest of tastes? And the Buddha's answer is that truth is the sweetest of tastes. And I think that there's a real significance in the Buddha's emphasis here on truth. because I would say that truth has benefits at many levels. Sometimes we think that following truth is not so necessary if we could get away with some lies to promote our own advantage. No reason not to tell those lies. But what holds any group of people together? What is essential to the functioning of a community, whether it be even a family, people living together in a neighborhood, people working together at an occupation, at a workplace, or at the widest level, people living together in a society, is a commitment to truth. And so when truth is undermined by the habit of speaking falsehoods, speaking lies, it might seem innocent and inconsequential, but if we look at the long-term consequences, they could be disastrous. And we could see this. I mean, we have so tragic confirmation of this in the present situation right here in this country, in the United States, maybe even more widely in other countries around the world. So when the coronavirus arrived on our shores back maybe in February, we were told by some of authorities that it's really nothing. We just have a few cases here. We have it completely under control. There's nothing to worry about. Just go about your day-to-day activities and everything is going to be all right. Then as the virus spread more widely, we were told again by some of our political leaders, by some of we call this the alternate news sources and websites, this a coronavirus is nothing really terribly harmful. It's really just a variant on the flu. It's just a common cold. You can, again, go about your activities. Don't worry about it. Don't wear masks. Do whatever you want. If you want to meet your friends, go to gatherings, just go ahead, and nothing to worry about. And so this went on month after month. And what do we see today? Something like now approaching maybe 320,000 people dead. So many people lamenting the loss of loved ones, people living in fear, all because of lies propagating through society. And we see this in many, many ways. Lies. In fact, we've learned that don't trust. When lies are propagated so widely throughout a society, we lose all trust in people. We don't know who to believe anymore. And this becomes a real problem in this country, well, even throughout the whole world, because we have people get their information from websites that confirm their pre-existing biases. And so people are living in silos presenting very different pictures of reality. And so we could say maybe through some of the mainstream media, people living in a common reality, which corresponds more or less to the true situation in the world. But then these extreme alternative websites have popped up presenting very different pictures of reality. And the sad fact is that millions of people subscribe to those websites and news sources and believe them, even though they propagate constant falsehoods, what they call alternative facts, fake news. And they come to believe that. And so they have a picture of reality that's completely at odds with a picture of reality that corresponds more or less to the way things truly are. And this serves to foment violence throughout the society when people who subscribe to that distorted picture of the world come into contact with those who are subscribing to a more or less accurate picture of the world, then it leads to conflicts, disputes, even to violence. And since guns are so rampant throughout the society, it could even lead to death threats and to physical violence. We saw this, an example of this, with the presidential election in the state of Georgia, where Joe Biden obviously won the state, but the proponents of President Trump kept on saying that he really won. And so the election officials who were trying to, even though they were Republicans, but they wanted to certify the correct electoral vote, some of them were receiving death threats from those who subscribe to the alternate picture of reality. But when we have a group that is committed to truth, then this will conduce to harmony within the group, and we have a real picture of the nature of things. And so this is one among several of the reasons that the Buddha says truth is the sweetest of tastes. And then the fourth question that Alavaka asks is, what is the best way to live one's life? What is the best guidance for life? And the Buddha answers, to live by wisdom is the best way of life. So what is meant here by wisdom? And the way I understand this verse, it's not speaking specifically about the higher wisdom that's special to the Buddha's teaching, the wisdom that leads to liberation. That will come with the next set of verses. But this is what I would call a fundamental, ethically oriented wisdom that gives one a kind of guidance in how to make decisions that affect one's life. And there's an interesting discourse of the Buddha that occurs in another collection of Buddhist texts called the Numerical Discourses, where the Buddha says that there are 4 courses of conduct that are available to us. There's a course of conduct that is painful now, unpleasant now, that will bring suffering if we engage in it now, and that will lead to our long-term harm and suffering. So that is course number 1. Course number 2, there's another type of action that is pleasant to engage in now. If we engage in it, we enjoy it, and it has the capacity to lead to our long-term well-being and happiness. The third course of action is the one that is pleasant and enjoyable now, but it has the capacity to lead in the long run to our suffering and misery. And then the fourth way of action is a way of action that is difficult and painful now, but if we take it up, it has the capacity to lead to our long-term well-being and happiness. So we have these 4 alternatives. And the Buddha says, okay, we take the first course, the one that's painful now, and leads to long-term suffering, that is the kind of alternative that anybody would avoid, because we don't want to suffer now, we don't want to suffer in the future. And so anybody, whether one is wise or foolish, one will avoid that. The second course, which is pleasant now and leads to long-term happiness and well-being, again, anybody will adopt that kind of action, because people are attracted to pleasure. And so if they take up that action, they'll enjoy it now, and then they'll reap the beneficial consequences in the future. But it is the other two types of actions. That is where we can distinguish who is the wise person and who is the fool. So when we have the action that is pleasant now, but will in the long run lead to pain and suffering, the foolish person will be drawn to that type of action because they want to enjoy the pleasure and they don't understand the harm and danger that lies ahead. So, for example, maybe confiscating the wealth of others. So you want to enjoy the wealth of others. So that has dangerous consequences in the long term. But it's good to have that, or cheating maybe on one's tax returns. So in this way, you get extra money, but because you're cheating, it's creating unwholesome karma with bad results in the future. Or, okay, somebody engages in adultery. So they have sexual relations with the partner or wife or husband of another person. So it's enjoyable now, but it leads to misery in the future. Or they tell lies to gain some advantage for themselves in the present. But again, those actions have long-term harmful consequences. So that's where one of the ways you distinguish the foolish person and the wise person. And then the fourth course of action is the action that's difficult now, painful now, disagreeable now, but in the long term, it brings beneficial consequences. So some examples of this, for example, maybe giving something in charity, as practicing what we call in Buddhism dana. So you take some of your wealth, even if it's a little, and you donate it to a worthy cause. So the mind has a natural tendency, or at least with many people, to cling and to become attached to our wealth. And so for many people, it's a struggle to give. So when you engage in the act of giving, initially it might be unpleasant. It requires some determination, resolution to practice giving. But when you practice that giving after you give, then you feel some pleasant, you feel some joy comes into the mind, because you're freeing the mind from its grasping and attachment. And through the working of the law of karma, the practice of giving brings beneficial fruits. It generates that wholesome karma, so that the karma will come back to you by bringing pleasant environment in the future, leading to a happy rebirth and many, many blessings in the future. Again, observing the precepts, the Buddha's precepts. For many people, it takes an active will to observe these precepts, to avoid killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, the use of intoxicants. So one might be accustomed to violating these precepts. And so you have to exercise some force of restraint on the mind. But as you observe the precepts, you see over time that it is freeing the mind from its unwholesome tendencies, from its addictions to detrimental action. And those actions, those conduct in conformity with the precepts, will bring again blessings in the future. And so the kind of wisdom that, in my understanding, that's intended here is the capacity to discriminate and distinguish what are the types of actions, the opportunities, the ways of life that might be disagreeable now, but will promote my long-term benefit and happiness. And what are the ways that are enjoyable and pleasant now, but in the long term will lead to harm and suffering. So with this wisdom as our guidepost, we can make the right distinctions, the right discrimination, and the right choices that will lead to our well-being and happiness now, contribute to our true well-being, which will promote wholesome and harmonious relations with others, with the right kinds of people, and will lead to our spiritual progress from one life to the next. Okay, so with this, we've gone through the Buddha's response to the first 4 questions of Alavaka. Okay, so after the Buddha answered the first 4 questions from the demon Alavaka, Alavaka asked another 4 questions. Again, these questions are in the form of a 4-line verse. So he asks, how does one cross the flood? How does one cross the sea? How does one overcome suffering? How is one fully purified? And in these questions, Alavaka is speaking, the first 2, speaking metaphorically. So what is meant by the flood here? This is the flood of what we call in Buddhism, samsara. Samsara is the wandering on in the cycle of repeated birth and death. So the Buddha teaches that our life doesn't just begin with birth and end with our death, but that every single lifetime is just one link in a beginningless series of rebirths going on without any discoverable first point. And in each life, we take birth, we grow up, we grow old. If we live that long, we grow old. Repeatedly, we fall ill, and then we die, going on to a new life. And so the Buddha sees all this existence in the round of rebirths, samsara, to be like a terrible flood, a torrential flood, by which we're just swept along from birth to death, from death to new birth. And so the final goal for Buddhism is not to achieve some blissful rebirth in a heavenly realm, but to break the entire cycle of repeated birth and death, and to attain the state of ultimate liberation, which he calls in Pali Nibbana, better known in Sanskrit as nirvana. So this is the state that he also calls the amrita, the deathless, the imperishable state, the indestructible state beyond the round of birth and death. And so the ultimate task for the Buddhist disciple is to cross that flood of samsara and to reach what lies beyond samsara, which the Buddha sometimes speaks of metaphorically as the far shore, the state of safety beyond this torrential flood of repeated birth and death. And so that is the flood and the sea that the questions are referring to. And so the Buddha answers with his verse, the first line of verse. He says, by faith, one crosses the flood. So here the Buddha is speaking not about faith in the broader, more general sense that he was referring to in the previous verse. But here, faith has a narrower range or narrower meaning. It is the trusting, trustful faith in the Buddha as the fully enlightened teacher, the one who has comprehended the nature of existence and who teaches the path to liberation. So to embark on that path, one has to begin with faith, with a trusting confidence in the Buddha, in the enlightenment of the Buddha, and a faith that by taking up this path, by practicing this path, one will be able to cross the flood. And the path that one is embarking on is what the Buddha calls the Noble Eightfold Path, the path of right views, right intentions, right speech, right bodily actions, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So when he says, by faith one crosses the flood, it doesn't mean that one can gain liberation just by faith alone, just by believing in the Buddha and his teaching. But it's through this faith, this trusting confidence in the Buddha and in the truth of his teaching that one is willing to take that step of entering upon the path. And it is that path that will lead step by step across the flood to the far shore of liberation, of nirvana. But once one enters upon the path, then one needs to bring in another quality, and that is indicated by the second verse, the second line of the verse. By heedfulness, one crosses the sea. The original word in Pali, translated heedfulness, is appamada, which means being vigilant, diligent in practicing the teaching. So sometimes heedfulness is explained as bringing together right mindfulness and right effort. So it's through right mindfulness that one attends to all one's activities, keeping one's attention settled upon them, focused upon them, so that one is constantly mindful. And that constant mindfulness builds up the force of mental concentration and the focusing of the mind that enables one to gain insight into the true nature of things. And that mindfulness has to be sustained by energy. So that's why the third line, by energy, one overcomes suffering. So heedfulness or constant mindfulness and energy or right effort work together in the task of mental purification. And what one has to do to purify the mind is to be able to control the unwholesome mental impulses that arise from greed or attachment or craving, from anger, ill will, hostility, and delusion, stupidity, foolishness. And so one is mindful in one's, the Buddha speaks about 4 domains of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body and bodily activities, mindfulness of one's feelings, mindfulness of one's state of mind, and then mindfulness of the constituents or factors of experience. And so it's through energy and mindfulness working together with heedfulness that one can cross the sea and overcome suffering. And when mindfulness and energy work together, they bring up the factor mentioned in the fourth verse. By wisdom, one is fully purified. That is, mindfulness and energy work together to bring the mind to one-pointed focus, to kind of unification of the mind, so the mind can remain sustained on the objects of observation. And what we observe and investigate with this unified, concentrated mind is the nature of our own experience, which the Buddha explains in terms of what he calls the 5 aggregates, the 5 constituents of experience. These are the bodily form, then feelings, perceptions, the volitional activities, and consciousness. So one investigates these 5 aspects or 5 constituents of experience, investigates them with insight until one sees their true nature. And the true nature is that they are all impermanent, arising and passing away, constantly arising and passing away. That in these 5 aggregates functioning together, there's no stable core, no solid core, but the 5 are working together, always arising, and in a moment perishing, vanishing, passing away. And as one sees more and more deeply into the nature of experience, sees how all the factors of experience undergo constant arising and passing away, one's wisdom becomes keener and keener, stronger and stronger, sharper and sharper. And when wisdom becomes strong and sharp, it cuts off permanently and irreversibly the mental defilements, which the Buddha calls the fetters, the factors that keep us in bondage to the cycle of repeated birth and death. Especially the strongest fetters are those of craving, the attachment and craving and grasping, and ignorance, the delusion or lack of understanding of the nature of things. And so when wisdom becomes bright and strong and powerful, it cuts off craving and attachment. It cuts off ill will and aversion. It drives away the darkness of ignorance, and then the mind becomes fully purified. And when the mind is fully purified, then one gains the final goal of the Buddha's teaching, which is nirvana or nibbana, the state of ultimate liberation. And in that way, the Buddha answers Alavaka's 4 questions pertaining to the higher goal. And this will complete my discourse today. So I thank you all for your attention, and let me wish you all blessings and happiness. And I hope that in some way this discourse was beneficial to you. Thank you again very much.
We would like to present a Buddhist song titled The Bdtv by the Wayfarers.
In the forest dense and wild, providing shade for fierce and mild, beloved by both man and child, the holy bowl stands. In the city's sun-brown heart, where the highways meet and part, beneath whose shade the sparrows dart, the holy Bodhi stands. Down the river's fertile shore, where young meet for Dharma's law, enshrined within a pilgrim door, the holy Bodhi stands. Years by thousands have gone by since that Indian prince did sigh, and where became the Buddha high, the holiest Bodhi stands.
Now it is time for the weekly Dhammapada sermon, a collection of sayings of Buddha, which is one of the best-known Buddhist scriptures and most widely read. The weekly Dhammapada will be presented by Venerable Professor Bhante Sivali. Let us welcome Bhante Sivali to present a brief sermon of the Dhammapada.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good evening. Welcome to the Bdtv program, Dhammapada program. Thank you for coming. As usual, you have been punctual. Thank you. Today we are going to discuss verse number 94. We have already discussed last few verses, and there we discussed the status of so-called enlightened, Sotapanna, Anagami, Arahant, all this, Sakurdagami, once returner, non-returner, enlightened one. So we have, to some extent, I guess that you have basic understanding about the enlightened ones, arhants, and I explained you in details precisely the position, the level of Sotapanna, Sakurdagami, Anagami, Arhant, the four stages of enlightened ones. And we now discuss their qualities, how they are in the world of ordinary people, how they are, how we see them, how we look at them, how we understand them. So it is important that we should understand these saints, why we call them saints, how we call them saints, with what knowledge we call them saints. Do we have anything regarding them? We talk about their qualities, noble qualities that we do not possess. We even cannot feel, because it's different stage, different level. So it is very important to understand, at least our knowledge could be bookish, then we can understand their level, what level they are, how they are. In one instance, somebody questioned the levels of these enlightened ones. And it was, of course, at the time of Buddha. Some monks, they came, they complained to other monks, certain monks who were said to be enlightened ones. When they complained, those ordinary people, those who didn't know who the Arahants are, they simply have looked at them to make up stories. And they have made a big mistake. We do not play with the fire. Spiritual ones, enlightened ones, are most noble, worthy ones. And if we look at them, if we create certain ill will towards them, we are generating enormous sin that we cannot even imagine how it will be going to be, how it is going to be affect into us. The cardinal error on our part, if we develop kind of ill will towards the enlightened ones. Therefore, it is good to know who the enlightened ones, why we call them enlightened, why we do need to pay respect to them, venerate them. These are the things that we need to know. Especially about the enlightened ones, we have to have a clear understanding of their position. Of course, without any experience of their level, we need to understand how they are. Then we will definitely generate good attitude towards them, and thereby we will generate in good wholesome thoughts, which we call a meritorious deeds. Meritorious deeds. One time, remember that Buddha answered to a question that is about regarding the enlightened ones. When they asked about the enlightened ones, when some certain people had certain concerns, Buddha dispelled their doubts. Dispelled their doubt. Yasindriyani samatang gatani assa yatasara sinasudanta pahina manasa anavasassa devapitassa pyanti thadinu. That is how the Buddha explained about, give a brief introduction or brief knowledge about who the Arahant, who the enlightened ones, who the noble ones, so that the ordinary man can understand. So, yassa indriyani samatani gatani. Yassa indriyani samatani gatani. Assa yata saratino sudanta. Pahina manas anasavas devapite vyayanti tadino. This is what the Buddha said about to dispel the doubt about that person as to how these enlightened ones are. So Buddha uttered this verse. That means those whose senses are calmed as a horse, trained by a horse tamer who have fully given up judgment, who is free of influences. The sight of those mentally stable ones pleases even the gods. Even the gods will be pleased by the sight of these so-called enlightened ones. So this is one instance where Buddha explained in a brief who the arahants, who the enlightened ones are. So it is indriyani, yasindriyani samatangatani means the senses, the indriyani, the senses. Sense is a name for the 6 senses mentioned in the suttas. Everywhere you have heard of it, we have taught you about 6 senses. They are eye, the Pali word is chakku, ear, Pali word is sota, nose, ghana, Pali word, and jivha is the Pali word for tongue, and kaya, Pali word for body, thought, mano. So these are 6 senses. Right? And thadino is a word that is used, is unaffected by the influences within and without. The Buddha is steady in 4 ways because he has ended his wanderings in samsara. Samsara means long journey of traveling between birth and death, unending journey. You can stop only by way of stopping birth. These are 4 ways in which he is steady on that account. A person's stability is the emotional stability that comes from not reacting to what is seen. What is seen? Heard, smelt, tasted, or touched. The reaction begins with the judgment of things as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant. Guarding the senses, called Indriya Samvara. Indriya means senses. This senses. Gardening is Samvara, is a Pali word. So gardening the senses prevents the reaction. When not reacting, the senses are calm. So there are no reactions from so-called enlightened ones. So-called enlightened ones, no reaction. Therefore, it is good that we can feel little bit, not feel of course, to understand their level. But then now, having explained who the Arahants, or the 4 different levels of Arahantship, Sovan, Sakritagami, Anagami, Arahat, he explained the position of these enlightened ones. Position of these enlightened ones. It is a stage that there is no more left for him or her to accomplish, because he has or she has accomplished everything what is to be accomplished. What is to be accomplished? The noble Arahants never lose their temper. Whatsoever is done to them, they are as firm and unshaken as the gate pillars that secure city gates, like in a palace, where the kings and queens and princes and princesses, they are protected by a huge gate. They are as lucid and tranquil as the ocean and the lakes devoid of mud. Ocean is calm, deep in the lakes which are calm inside, deep, no muds. That kind of noble person ceases to wander in the round of existence. The round of existence means traveling between death and birth, death and birth. There's no more. It ceases the round of existence. It's called samsara. Samsara. So these are the explanations given by Buddha on separate occasions according to the questions posed by some enlightened ones and also some unenlightened ones, to see how these monks level. Arhants, there is no question for them about their arhantship, therefore they know. But when the others, due to certain inherited practices in previous existence, then there are sometimes they have the questions to ask as to why this kind of behavior is conducted by so-called attained, enlightened ones. So that's on these occasions Buddha have explained who the arhants, how they are reacting or respond. There's no reaction by them, not at all. We ordinary people react to this, but arhant never reacts. So the calm and never will be again traveling in the long journey of samsara. How nice it is going to be if we will be free from that long journey of samsara. It is in your hand, it is in my hand. Therefore, Buddha has taught the path to that liberation, to be free from death and to be free from suffering and to attain the deathlessness. Those who attain their arhant, those who attain their enlightened ones, we will be able to see that stage only when we attain to that level. For that, that's a teaching of the Buddha. May you all be well and happy.
In the forest dense and wild, providing shade for fierce and mild, beloved by both man and child, the holy Bodhi stands. In the city's sun-brown heart, where the high
That concludes today's program. If you have any questions about the contents of our broadcast, please feel free to reach out to us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. Our dedicated team remains committed to sharing the profound teachings of the Buddha, helping you walk the path of wisdom and enlightenment. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time. Namo Buddhaya.